Hi, I'm here with Tania Daniels, the head of Global Legal Operations at the Walt Disney Company. We're at the ACC Legal Operations Conference in Chicago. I wanted to start, Tania, by just asking you a little bit about how you came into the legal operations role. I noticed you had an MLS
Yes.
prior to law school, I think, and
Yes.
done some KMS at law firms. Was this a sort of natural extension of that work?
Absolutely. I was fortunate enough to actually have done knowledge management work in the medical field before I went to law school. And after law school, I practiced briefly, but realized I missed the variability that you get in a knowledge management role, and ended up being the director of knowledge management at 2 law firms. And got a recruiter phone call that said, would you like to come over and work at Disney? And 11 years later, it just has naturally morphed from knowledge management and technology into a full range of legal operations.
Well, you're here on a panel focused particularly on data security management. And wondering, with the recent breaches in the last couple of years, is there more awareness of this within corporate counsel and within the firms that you're working with?
Absolutely. It's not just the few firms that made the front page of the Wall Street Journal that have caught everyone's attention. People are more aware now of the type of data that they're sharing with outside counsel, the sensitivity and criticality of it, and what the impact would be should another law firm suffer a breach. So both in-house counsel and law firms, I think, are taking a variety of steps to increase the security of the communications between both parties.
And what kind of data are we talking about, and what kind of data was it a surprise to find, hey, we're sharing this, or it's being shared by companies?
Absolutely. When we looked at our program, which we started a couple of years ago, we realized that we needed to take a risk-based approach, which was very similar to how our company approaches all security evaluations. And clearly the kinds of information that, if breached, would cause significant harm or damage to a company or brand was of great concern. Obviously this includes things like M&A, confidential litigations, other matters that which you're sharing information that is extremely confidential and, again, would damage the brand were it leaked.
How good a job are law firms, or were they doing, in managing and securing this data?
Well, we've been very positively surprised in the conversations and we've had with law firms. Certainly large law firms have already put into place security programs. Many have hired chief information security officers. They've taken great steps to, quote-unquote, harden their environment, to use a security term, and to put practices and processes in place that really secure their data. When you look at mid-sized or smaller firms, the conversation changes a little. Some of the mid-sized are now beginning to do the same thing. But some of the solo practitioners, are kind of like, they're not even sure what security means. And so it's a different conversation with each law firm vendor that you use.
And how much of a factor is this when you're looking at who to hire as outside counsel? Or is it just if they don't have this floor, we won't even consider them?
Well, I know that there are companies that certainly have decided they are going to require certain security requirements, or they simply cannot work with them. Certainly in the regulated industries such as banking and finance, they just simply can't do that. What we have decided to do is publish the results that we have for our firms to all of our attorneys, so they're aware. If firms are not willing to take steps to remediate any gaps that we found, we want to make them aware of that before they continue to hire those firms.
Is there that willingness? Are firms responsive when you show them, hey, you have these gaps?
Surprisingly, yes. I mean, we've had 1 or 2 cases where there's been some resistance, but for the most part, I've just found it a relatively positive project that we've been working on. I think law firms have realized over the last couple of years this was not a one and done. This isn't going away. Cybersecurity is the watchword of this decade, and it's something that they're going to have to continue to deal with, not just for our business, for business of any large corporation.
Along those lines, is this an ongoing conversation where you review the security needs and talk with the law firms rather than a one-time review?
Yes, that's certainly what we're doing. We just have begun what we would consider a phase 1, where we did an initial review. And we are moving into more of a program phase where we're operationalizing it, and we're looking at based on, again, the type of information we share with firms, how frequently we need to revisit, and what do we need to revisit on a regular basis. But every firm that we work with will at some point in time have some kind of a conversation, and the conversation will continue. This is never you look good now and we can go away and not have to discuss this again.
I had seen that the ACC had come up with some best practices guidelines last year. How has that helped in the sense of providing a baseline for these conversations?
Absolutely. I think that some companies may not be large enough to have a global security group that simply can step in and say, hey, here's ours, go ahead and use them, or be willing to modify a set of security questions that are appropriate for a professional services vendor. And so when the ACC model guidelines came along, I think it was a terrific beginning and starting point for people to look at what do we really need to ask our firms, to go through the questions and say what's appropriate for our company, what's appropriate for our industry, and what's appropriate for the firms that we work with.
How about in terms of lessons learned that you've sort of experienced so far? What would your advice be to other counsel or to law firms?
Well, I'd say advice to my colleagues and in-house is I had spoken with a number of other law departments that had gone before me, and they all advised it's going to take you longer than you think, so plan for that. And my advice would be it's going to take you longer than you think, and then it's going to take you even longer than that. It's just, this is a huge change management initiative as well. For law firms, I would say, don't be afraid of this. This is, to us, this is simply part of an ongoing outside counsel, in-house counsel relationship. There's many aspects to that, and this is just one to make sure that the working environment on both sides meets everyone's needs for a successful long-term relationship.
What contributes to that change management? Is it resistance? Is it just not awareness of what needs to be done?
I think it's honestly initially was lack of awareness. I think over the last few years, the conversation around this, particularly in legal circles, both in law firms and in-house counsel, has increased the awareness. I think it's not a surprise for partners at law firms to get an email that says, hey, guess what, we're going to be looking at your law firm security. I don't think it's a surprise for in-house counsel to suddenly have to participate in those conversations with firms. So we also consider it a constant educational process with our attorneys and with our attorneys in terms of how to work with firms.
Do you think you'll get to a point where it's just a given that this is done, it's in place, and there's no surprise emails that this is something that's coming?
I certainly think that will be the case for the large multinational firms. I think it's still going to take a while for some of the smaller firms, and in our case as well, for some of the international firms, meaning those firms that have absolutely no U.S. presence. But for them, I think we're at a beginning stage, but I think we'll get there. I think ultimately everyone reads a cybersecurity news story, whether it's about legal or not, in the news each day. So this is not a new problem or issue, and it's now hit legal, and everyone's going to have to be a part of the solution.
How long is it going to take?
How long is it going to take? Wow, that's a loaded question. I think that probably, certainly the AmLaw 200 is, if it's not there, I think it'll be there within the next couple of years. Again, I think when you get down into the smaller and more international firms, I think we're looking longer term, at least 5 years before there's a willingness and an awareness on their side to sort of solve that problem. You also have to be very cognizant when you're in an international space. The laws are very different, and you have to be mindful of what it is we're asking is appropriate and legal and regulatorily allowed in their country.
Has the European, the changes there, has that affected the kind of the data you're concerned about or considering?
The GDPR hasn't impacted our law firm security program so much as stepping, I'd say, into other regions of the world where they have less experience in terms of trying to understand how should data be secured, how should it be shared, what does a cross-border data transfer really mean, has that really been defined? Clearly EMEA and the EU led the way, so not so much GDPR, but some of the other regions with a little less experience. I look forward to seeing how they engage in that.
Well, Tania Daniels, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you. Glad to have it.